Back in high school, there was this guy in my class who made my life miserable for no apparent reason other than I was an easy target. Quiet, a bit awkward, new to the school after moving towns. He'd trip me in the hallways, knock my books out of my hands, spread rumors that I was weird, or whatever kids say to isolate someone. It wasn't violent, but it was constant, and it wore me down until I dreaded going to school. The sound of his laugh, a sharp, barking thing, would knot my stomach before I even saw him. My existence became a series of small evasions, taking the long way to classes, eating lunch in a bathroom stall, making myself as small and silent as possible in hopes of becoming invisible. It never worked. I was the designated ghost, and he was the one who made sure everyone else saw me, but only as a thing to be laughed at. One day, he went too far. During lunch, he grabbed my tray, dumped my food on the floor, and laughed while everyone watched. A silent circle had formed, a passive audience to my humiliation. Spaghetti and red sauce splattered across the linoleum, a messy, public stain. I didn't cry or fight back. I just got down on my knees and cleaned it up, piece by piece, napkin by sodden napkin, and then sat there at the empty table, eating nothing. But inside, something cold and hard finally snapped. The heat of shame crystallized into a plan. I decided I was done being his punching bag. I knew he was obsessed with video games. Specifically, he bragged nonstop about his Pokémon save file on his Game Boy. He'd spent months building the perfect team, legendary birds, a level 100 Charizard, a complete Pokédex. He carried that Game Boy everywhere like it was a holy relic, the one thing he truly cared about. So that afternoon, when he left it unattended on a bench in the locker room after gym class, the tiny gray cartridge peeking from its slot, I saw my chance. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum of fear and fury. I waited until the last straggler had left, until the echo of slamming lockers had faded. The air smelled of sweat and mildew. I picked it up. The plastic was warm from his pocket. My fingers, clumsy with adrenaline, fumbled with the power switch. The screen lit up with a cheerful, tinny melody that felt obscene in the tense silence. I navigated to New Game without hesitation. The system asked, "Are you sure?" For a second, I saw not the Game Boy, but his sneering face over the spilled tray. I pressed, yes. The process felt eternal, a progress bar inching across the screen, digitally unwriting hundreds of hours of his life. When it was done, I put it back exactly where he left it, the weight of the action settling in my gut like a stone. The next day, he came to school devastated. He was pale, hollow-eyed, almost crying in homeroom, telling anyone who would listen that his save was gone. "It's all gone," he kept repeating, his voice cracking. He accused a few friends of tampering with it, got into screaming arguments in the hallway, even got sent to the principal's office for yelling at a teacher who told him to calm down. The adults were baffled. They saw a kid having a bizarre meltdown over a cartoon game. His friends tried to console him, but he was inconsolable, a raw nerve of loss. He spent weeks in a fog, trying to recover the data or grumpily start over, but the magic was gone. He never got back to where he was. The bullying stopped completely. He became withdrawn, quieter, his grades slipped. The predator had lost his taste for the hunt, consumed by a private misery of his own. At the time, it felt like perfect, poetic justice. He'd humiliated me publicly, so I had destroyed something he loved privately. I had hit him where it truly hurt, and no one would ever suspect the quiet, awkward kid. I felt a surge of power so potent it was dizzying. But as the weeks bled into months, the cold stone in my gut began to thaw into a different kind of sickness. I watched him not as a tormentor, but as a person, a slumped-shouldered boy who'd lost his world. He wasn't some monster. He was just a dumb teenager acting out, probably dealing with his own unspoken storms at home. I later heard rumors about his parents' vicious divorce, the shouting matches that leaked through the walls. Seeing him genuinely broken over something that was, in the grand scheme, a harmless hobby, made me realize I'd crossed a line. My revenge wasn't petty payback, it was a surgical strike on his happiness. I had become the source of a pain I knew all too well. I never told a soul. And to this day, whenever I think about it, the feel of the buttons under my thumb, the pixelated starter Pokémon appearing on a fresh save, I regret it. Not the cessation of his cruelty, but the method. It taught me that revenge can feel like a supernova of righteousness in the instant, but it leaves behind a black hole of guilt that pulls at you for years, reminding you that in fighting a monster, you risk sculpting one from your own anger. Another time, in college, my roommate was a nightmare. She borrowed my clothes without asking, stretching out my favorite sweaters. She ate my carefully labeled food, left crusted dishes and makeup wads festering in our tiny sink, and blasted thumping bass late into the night when I had 8 a.m. exams. I'd ask her nicely, pleadingly, to be considerate. She'd laugh it off with a dismissive wave. Relax, live a little. You're so uptight. Her entitlement was a force field I couldn't penetrate. One weekend, she threw a raucous party while I was away visiting family. I returned to a war zone, sticky floors, a broken lamp, and the rancid smell of spilled beer. My desk had been used as a bar. And my expensive makeup kit, a birthday gift from my grandmother, was splayed open, lipstick smashed, powders cratered, expensive brushes stained and stiff with product. When I confronted her, shaking with rage, she just shrugged, picking at her nail polish. "It's just stuff," she said, not even looking at me. "We can split the cost of the lamp." I was furious, but trapped. We had to live together for another semester. Direct conflict had failed. So, I got ingeniously petty. I knew she had a paralyzing, almost theatrical fear of bugs. A tiny spider would send her shrieking onto a chair. I went online and ordered a bag of hyperrealistic fake cockroaches, the kind with detailed carapaces and wiry antennae that looked like they'd skitter away if you blinked. Over the next week, I executed my campaign with calm precision. I tucked one into the toe of her favorite boot. I coiled one amidst her spaghetti strap camisoles. I placed one delicately on her toothpaste tube. The piece de resistance was taping a small one inside her laptop keyboard, right under the H key. Her reactions were everything I'd dreamed of and more. Piercing screams echoed through our hall. She called campus maintenance daily, convinced we had a horrifying infestation. She spent a small fortune on bug bombs that left our room reeking of toxic chemicals, forcing us to evacuate for hours. She became a paranoid shell, jumping at specks of dust, compulsively cleaning, accusing neighbors of tracking in filth. For the first few days, it was delicious. The careless queen of chaos was now a prisoner of her own pristine, chemical-soaked anxiety. But then it escalated beyond my script. One night, I returned to find her sitting on the floor, knees to her chest, sobbing uncontrollably to our resident advisor. "They're everywhere," she hiccuped, her face blotchy and terrified. "I can't sleep. I feel them crawling on me." The RA, shooting me a suspicious look, comforted her. It was then, through her fractured, panicked story, that I learned the truth. It wasn't just a silly fear. When she was a child, her family had lived in a condemned apartment with a severe roach infestation. She'd been trapped in a crib, she said, watching them swarm over her bottles. It was a deep-seated trauma. My clever prank hadn't just annoyed her, it had unlocked a vault of childhood terror. She moved out within the week, paying hefty fees to break her housing contract. I heard through the grapevine she was seeing a counselor for anxiety. My intent had been to give her a taste of the powerlessness I felt. Instead, I'd become the source of a genuine, debilitating fear. The satisfaction curdled into a profound, shameful awfulness. I had weaponized a phobia I didn't understand. Maybe I shouldn't have done that. I learned that petty is a label we use to minimize harm, but the recipient gets to define the wound. My joke was her horror story. In my first job out of college, I had a boss who was a classic, soul-sapping micromanager. Martin would stand behind my chair, breathing coffee breath down my neck as I worked. He'd take credit for my ideas in client meetings with a smooth, as I was just explaining to my team. He'd criticize the font choices on internal memos, then leave promptly at 4 p.m. while assigning me work that would keep me there until 8. The final straw was a project I'd slaved over for weeks, a comprehensive market analysis full of insights I'd dug up through late nights and clever research. He presented it verbatim to upper management, received glowing praise, and was awarded a significant bonus. When I meekly mentioned my contribution, he patted my shoulder. "Team effort, kiddo. That's why you're here." I was livid, but I needed the job, the reference, the rent money. So, I began a campaign of malicious compliance. It was a passive-aggressive art form. Every vague, poorly thought-out email instruction from Martin became my scripture. He'd write, "Make this report better." I'd spend days adding irrelevant appendices, generating 3D graphs of tangential data, bloating a 10-page document into a 50-page tome of impenetrable nonsense. "Fix the presentation," he'd command. I'd fix it by changing all the fonts to Comic Sans, adding garish clip art, and setting obnoxious slide transitions. It was always just plausible enough to deflect a direct accusation of sabotage. I was just following orders, to the letter. Initially, it was gratifying. He'd get flustered in meetings when executives questioned the confusing reports. He started getting side-eye from his superiors, who wondered why his previously sharp junior was suddenly producing such chaotic work. He'd berate me, and I'd nod, wide-eyed. "I was just doing what you asked, Martin." But the snowball I'd started rolling grew into an avalanche. The stress of constantly having to explain and redo my diligent work, combined with the growing suspicion from above, ate at him. He got passed over for a promotion he'd been banking on. He started making his own mistakes, trying to overcorrect. I'll never forget the day he had a meltdown in a budget meeting, screaming at a VP over a misplaced decimal point, a decimal point that was, in fact, his own error. He was escorted from the building and put on mandatory medical leave for burnout. He never returned to his old role. The office atmosphere did improve, the tyranny was over. But through the gossip network, I learned snippets of his life outside: a terminally ill parent, massive medical debt, a marriage fraying under the strain. My petty, clever compliance hadn't just evened a score, it had been the final, feather-light weight that collapsed a structure already buckling under immense, invisible pressure. I had contributed to a real human downfall. The satisfaction of his exit turned to a heavy, metallic regret. Maybe I shouldn't have done that. I'd seen him as a caricature of a bad boss, not a man drowning in private desperation. My revenge was a policy change, his consequence was a personal collapse. When I was 12, a neighbor kid, Tyler, was the bane of my existence. He was a year older, bigger, with a mean streak as wide as the street. He'd steal my bike and hide it, taunt me with cruel nicknames, and once pushed me off my skateboard so hard I had a purple and green bruise on my hip for weeks. My parents, believers in the "ignore it and he'll go away" philosophy, told me to be the bigger person. But one day, he went into our unlocked garage and took my most prized possession, my comic book collection. I'd spent months of saved allowance building it, issue by precious issue. The theft felt like a violation of my inner world. I snuck into his backyard later that day, heart pounding, and stole them back from his messy room. He knew it was me. The next day, he cornered me, his face red with fury. "You're dead," he hissed, promising a daily beating. So, I planned my revenge. I knew his mother was a neat freak, with a perfectly manicured lawn and a pathological hatred for mess. I spent an afternoon at the park with a plastic bag and a stick, collecting cold, fresh dog poop. That night, under the cover of a moonless sky, I crept to his pristine suburban doorstep and flung the entire, stinking contents across the welcome mat, the door itself, and the potted geraniums. The result was immediate and severe. His mother, already a tightly coiled spring of stress, erupted. She blamed Tyler, assuming it was a prank gone wrong by her unruly son. He was grounded for a month, forced to scrub every inch of the porch with a toothbrush, missed a long-anticipated school trip to the water park, and lost all his video game privileges. The bullying stopped. He avoided me entirely, becoming quiet and sullen. But the fallout echoed. Our houses were close enough that on summer nights, with windows open, I could hear. The incident sparked nuclear arguments between his parents. His father accused his mother of being too harsh, she screamed back about disrespect and the burden of keeping a perfect home. I learned, through the neighborhood whisper network, that his parents had been on the brink of divorce for years. Tyler's acting out was a screaming symptom of their crumbling world. My brilliant poop bomb hadn't just punished a bully, it had poured gasoline on a family fire. He became more than quiet, he became ghostly, a shadow slipping in and out of his house. Kid me had reveled in the hilarious justice. Adult me looks back and cringes at the collateral damage. Maybe I shouldn't have done that. I'd escalated a skirmish into a siege on a kid whose home was already a battlefield. My revenge for stolen comics had stolen a piece of his precarious peace. These moments are the ghosts in my attic, the regrets I take down and dust off when I question my own character. They taught me that revenge is a shapeshifter. In the heat of righteous anger, it presents itself as a knight, a liberator, the only path to restored dignity. But once unleashed, it often reveals itself as something else, a mirror showing you a capacity for cruelty you didn't know you housed. The satisfaction is a flash paper blaze, intense and illuminating, but gone in an instant, leaving only cold ash and a darker room. It leaves you with the haunting question, what if I had just walked away? What if I had been the bigger person, not to benefit them, but to preserve myself? I've learned, through these scars on my own conscience, to channel anger into construction, not destruction. But those regrets remain, eternal tutors whispering that even the most deserved payback often reveals more about the avenger's hidden shadows than the victim's visible flaws. The reopening of Crown Velvet was not just an event. It was a coronation, a seismic shift in the city's cultural plates. I stood on the balcony that first night, a vantage point that had once been the exclusive perch of my oppressors, and watched the line stretch around the block, a vibrant, pulsing serpent of anticipation. There was no velvet rope dictating worth, no clipboard list deciding destiny. People came because they wanted to be part of something new, something that hummed with the energy of justice made manifest in purple neon and a deep, welcoming bass. The air inside was different, scrubbed clean of the old venue's lingering scent of desperation and elitism. Now it smelled of possibility, of zest from fresh citrus garnishes, of warm air stirred by dancing bodies. The staff moved with their heads high, their new uniforms, elegant, comfortable, designed with their input, crisp against the dark interior. Their smiles were genuine, unforced, because they knew their labor was valued, their dignity non-negotiable. I wore a custom gown that night. Deep emerald silk that flowed like a night river, with gold threading that caught every spotlight and sconce glow, weaving a crown of light directly onto the fabric. I wore no tiara. I didn't need one anymore. The crown was the club itself, the loyalty of the people below, the respect in the eyes of my team. Word spread like a virus in the industry, the good kind. Bookings poured in from corners I'd never imagined. Staid corporate events that once defaulted to soulless hotel ballrooms or the dreaded Apex. Celebrity birthday parties looking for a fresh, authentic vibe. Community fundraisers for causes that mattered, who wanted a space where every attendee, regardless of donation size, felt genuinely welcome. Crown Velvet became the neutral ground where Silicon Valley deals were sealed with handshakes over craft cocktails, where love stories began on the dance floor, where old social hierarchies quietly crumbled under the universal language of a good beat. I expanded carefully, strategically, never over-leveraging, never forgetting the vertiginous speed with which empires can fall. The opening of Crown Velvet South, in the cavernous, resurrected shell of the old warehouse that had once been part of Monroe's supply chain, was a moment of profound, poetic closure. The opening night crowd was a fascinating study. Sprinkled among the new believers were familiar faces from the old guard, the same people who had averted their eyes or offered weak smiles during my exile. They came with cautious congratulations that tasted like thinly veiled apology. I accepted them with a gracious nod and a measured smile. Power, I was learning, is sweetest when you don't need to prove you have it by rubbing their noses in it. Dignity is its own victory lap. Claudia tried one last, desperate gambit to claw her way back into relevance. About 6 months after her very public ban, a notorious gossip site ran a tearful, exclusive interview with her. Exiled from my own scene the night I lost everything, the headline screamed. She painted herself as the tragic victim of a vindictive, power-hungry former employee, hinted at defamation lawsuits, and played the wounded socialite to the hilt. It backfired spectacularly. The internet, with its long memory and newfound love for an underdog story, eviscerated her. The comments sections filled with thousands of screenshots from the night of the gala, the thrown coat, her snarling face, my calm response. Testimonies from former staff at her old venues surfaced, detailing her legendary cheapness and cruelty. Even old, blurry videos of her leaving Origami Swan tips went viral. The digital mob crowned me instead. #Black Empress trended for days. Crown Velvet's reservation system crashed under the influx. Marcus's fall was quieter but deeper. The board at Apex Tech, already uneasy about his family values brand being tarnished by the viral humiliation, used a broader corporate restructuring as the excuse to push him out. He took a golden parachute, of course, millions to go away quietly. But the tech world is a fickle beast. His name became a cocktail party cautionary tale, the CEO who let personal drama tank shareholder value. He and Claudia sold their glass-walled penthouse, the scene of so many of their triumphs, and retreated to a gated, beige stucco community in Arizona, fading from the scene they once ruled like sun-bleached photographs. I never heard from them again, and after a while, I stopped wondering. The real legacy, the one that warmed me from the inside, was in the people. Sarah, my fierce waitress turned legal, graduated law school at the top of her class. She now works pro bono for a renowned workers' rights nonprofit, and her first major case was against a national nightclub chain with predatory, abusive policies. Mike, the security guard with the heart of gold, opened his own firm specializing in venue safety and ethical client treatment. Jason, the bartender who served me that first defiant drink, became our head mixologist and created a signature cocktail called The Crown, a smoky, brilliant concoction. Proceeds from every one sold fund scholarships for hospitality students from underserved communities. Even Gary, the former manager with the wobbly spine, found his footing. He ran Crown Velvet South with a paternal gentleness he'd never exhibited before, treating his staff like a chosen family because he finally understood that in this business, your colleagues are your family. I never married the revenge. It was a necessary chapter, a dark forest I had to walk through to reach the sunlit field, but it wasn't the whole book. After the dust settled, I lived. I dated interesting, kind men who weren't intimidated by a woman with a crown. I traveled to places where no one knew my name. I mentored young black entrepreneurs, mostly women, trying to break into industries that still pretended we didn't belong. I funded after-school programs teaching kids business and financial literacy, because I remembered being the quiet girl who built something from sheer will and almost lost herself in the crucible of payback. Sometimes, very late at night, long after the last guest had stumbled happily into a cab and the cleaners had buffed the floors to a high shine, I would walk the empty club alone. The silence was a living thing, pulsing with the ghost echo of the night's music. I'd run my hand over the smooth mahogany of the bar where Claudia had once snapped her fingers for service. I'd stand at the redesigned, elegant coat check counter, my old cage, now a place of honor, and remember the shocking weight and scent of that first flung mink hitting my chest. I'd climb the stairs to the balcony and look down at the silent, empty tables, each one waiting to hold tomorrow's stories, tomorrow's celebrations. In those quiet moments, I'd think about the girl who once believed the high road was the only moral path, the one who cleaned up spilled food in silence and swallowed insults whole. The girl who almost let bitterness calcify her heart. And I'd think about the woman she became, the one who chose the low road for a single, necessary mile and found her way back up to a higher plateau than she'd ever imagined. Not unbroken, the scars were still there, fine lines on my soul, but unbreakable. The revenge had given me back my crown, had returned to me the agency that was stolen. But the mercy I showed in my success, the fairness I built into the empire's foundation, the second chances I quietly offered, that was what kept me worthy of wearing it. I had snatched the club from their grasping hands. I had taken the crown, a symbol of their hollow power, and I had made it mean something entirely new. I made it a throne for everyone who was ever told they didn't belong, a beacon for anyone who'd ever been made to feel small. The Empress reigns, not out of spite, but out of proof. Tangible, glorious proof that when they try to bury you, sometimes you don't just climb out. Sometimes you grow deep, strong roots right there in the darkness, and from them, you rise taller and stronger than they ever dreamed. Proof that a black woman with a plan, a long memory, and an unwavering moral core can turn public humiliation into a lasting, life-giving legacy. Proof that the house doesn't always win. Sometimes, the queen does. And when she does, she changes the rules of the game for everyone who comes after. A year after the gala that changed everything, Crown Velvet had solidified from a sensation into a movement. The original location downtown was thriving, a must-visit landmark. Crown Velvet South in the revived Warehouse District was the undisputed hotspot for live music, its stage a launchpad for emerging artists who found a loyal audience there. Whispers were already circulating about a third location, scouting reports from Atlanta landing on my desk. But success, I was learning, brings its own intricate weight, a tapestry of responsibility and scrutiny. I sat in my office above the balcony one quiet Tuesday afternoon, reviewing quarterly numbers that still sometimes felt like a dream I might wake from. The profit margins were healthy, robust. Staff retention was the highest in the city, a statistic that filled me with more pride than any revenue figure. Community partnerships were blossoming, bringing in grants and opportunities one could never have accessed in the old regime. My phone buzzed, a text from Sarah lighting up the screen, "Big interview request just came in. Vogue wants to profile you as one of the new power players reshaping nightlife." Thoughts? A year ago, my instinct would have been a reflexive no. Too much exposure. Too much risk of shaking the ghosts loose, of inviting old enemies to take fresh aim. But now, I felt a calm assurance. I typed back, "Tell them yes. But only if they feature the staff, too. The managers, the bartenders, the cleaners. This isn't just my story. It's ours." That evening, during the pre-open lull, I walked the floor in comfortable, elegant flats. No more punishing, sky-high heels, but no utilitarian non-slips either. Practical elegance had become my quiet, daily rebellion. I stopped at the coat check, now staffed by a sharp-eyed young woman named Aisha. Sarah had found her through one of our outreach programs. She'd been couch surfing, nearly homeless. Now, she was thriving, taking business classes at night, her confidence blooming like a night blooming Sirius. "You good, Aisha?" I asked. She grinned, a flash of white in the dim light. "Better than good, Empress. Watch this." She swiveled the monitor to show me a new digital ticketing system she'd helped our tech team design. It was streamlined, paperless, with a sleek interface and, notably, an option for guests to donate their coat check fee directly to local shelters. "Your thing about taking space and giving back, it stuck with me," she said, her voice proud. I felt a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with revenge or triumph. It was the warmth of a seed you planted finally breaking ground. Later, during peak hours, I returned to my balcony perch. The scene below was a masterpiece of controlled, joyful chaos. No one was being turned away for not being on brand. No one was snapping fingers or talking down to servers. The energy was electric, but it was a kind electricity, one that connected rather than shocked. I saw a group of teenagers from a local youth center, wide-eyed and buzzing, being given a tour by Mike. In a velvet booth, a same-sex couple was celebrating their engagement. The moment one got down on a knee, the entire room seemed to sense it, and a wave of cheers and applause rose, genuine and deafening. Mike materialized beside me, his presence as solid and reassuring as ever. "Security report," he said with a mock salute. "0 incidents. Again. Let's keep that streak going as long as we can," I replied. He hesitated, his easy smile faltering slightly. "Boss. Empress. Whatever we're calling you this week." He lowered his voice. "There's someone at the door asking for you. Personally. Says it's important." An old, cold knot tightened in my stomach. "Who?" "Claudia Harrington." The name hung in the air between us, a splinter of the past. I hadn't heard it spoken aloud in months. "I'll go down," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. She stood outside under the new, matte black crown velvet sign, looking diminished, a sculpture left out in the rain. The armor was gone, no fur, no razor-sharp designer dress, no blinding jewelry. She wore a simple, expensive but understated coat and jeans, her hair pulled back in a plain ponytail. The paparazzi-ready glare was absent. She was utterly alone. "Vanessa," she said quietly when she saw me. "No, sweetie. No sneer." "What do you want, Claudia?" I asked, my tone neutral, giving nothing away. "To apologize." Her voice cracked on the second syllable, a tiny fracture in her composure. "Properly. Not for cameras. Not for PR. Just, to say I'm sorry. For everything. The lies. The health inspector. The way I treated people. You." She took a shaky breath. "I was awful. And you didn't deserve any of it." I studied her face, the landscape of it familiar yet strangely new. The hard, glittering entitlement had been eroded, replaced by something raw and exposed. Regret, perhaps. Or maybe just exhaustion from the weight of being hated. "Why now?" I asked. "Therapy," she said with a bitter, hollow laugh. "And losing everything. Really losing it. Marcus and I, we're divorced. The money's all tied up in legal fights. I've been working as a hostess at a little family-owned Italian place in Scottsdale." She met my eyes, and for the first time, I saw no calculation in them, just a weary honesty. "It's humbling. Being on the other side of that podium. I get it now. What it feels like when someone with power decides you're nothing." I let the silence stretch, let her sit in it. The bass from inside thumped a steady rhythm against the door. "I don't expect forgiveness," she continued, her words coming faster now, as if she needed to get them all out. "I know I don't deserve it. I just needed to say it to your face. To acknowledge it. You built something beautiful out of what I tried to destroy. That's remarkable." She turned to leave, her shoulders slumped. "Claudia." She stopped, not turning around. "You're not banned anymore." She slowly turned back, her eyes wide with disbelief. "But," I continued, my voice firm, "you come as a guest. Same rules as everyone else. You treat every person in there with respect. You tip well. You cause no drama. And if you ever make anyone in my house feel small again, you're out for good." Understood. She nodded, tears welling but not falling. Understood. I watched her walk away, a smaller, perhaps lighter figure being absorbed by the city's night. Back on the balcony, Sarah found me, a glass of champagne in each hand. She handed one to me. Vogue confirmed. They loved the staff angle. They're sending a whole team. Good, I said, taking a sip. The bubbles were crisp, celebratory. Make sure they talk to Aisha. And Mike. And you. Sarah leaned on the railing beside me, looking out over her kingdom. You know, when I first started waiting tables here, back in the old days, I thought this job would just be a means to an end. Just a way to pay for law school. I never imagined I'd be part of this. She gestured to the thriving room below. Neither did I admitted softly. The DJ shifted the music, fading the upbeat track into a slow, soulful classic, a song I recognized. It was one I'd played during closing time at Monroe's Velvet Empire, years ago, when I was just the girl in the booth, watching the beautiful people leave. Someone on the dance floor recognized it, too, and started singing along. Then another voice joined. And another. Soon, the whole floor was one swaying, singing entity, a choir of shared joy. I leaned on the railing, crownless, but reigning all the same. From coat check to crown. From thrown furs to open doors. From buried dreams to an empire that lifted others as it rose. The toxic wife was gone, a relic of a vanquished era. The Black Empress remained. And the crown, I realized with a final, settling peace, it wasn't on my head anymore. It was reflected in the eyes of every person dancing below me, living freely and fully in the space I'd carved out of pain and polished with purpose. That was the real revenge. Not her fall, but our collective, glorious, undeniable rise.